Welcome to a new video in my Learning VBA series. In this video we are going to learn how we can access our Excel document from Visual Basic. Hopefully this lesson is going to be shorter than one of my previous ones. And actually I'm going to focus on just a few things in this particular lesson. They are not particularly complicated, but we need to go through this so we can move on and then start learning about more complicated stuff. In this lesson, we are going to look at specific objects within Excel and how to use these objects to access certain areas of the actual Excel document. So the first one is going to be cells, where we can see how we can read and write and change exact cells of the document. And then we are going to look at sheets, where you can access the different sheets. So again, let's say you have an Excel document which have multiple worksheets. Obviously you want to be able to control from which sheet you are reading data or which sheet you are writing data to. And then finally we're also going to look at applications, because I just want to show sort of this hierarchy as these objects are built upon each other. And of course, let's say application is being the root or the top of everything. That's where you can access functions which are applicable for the entire Excel document. And we have seen the range in previous lessons, so we are just going to look at it again and then see how we can use the range in certain scenarios. And then finally, I'm going to talk about the object browser. And this is something that was on the agenda for lesson 1, but lesson 1 was already approaching about 1 hour, so I decided to skip that and then use it in a future lesson. So that's the lesson that we are going to look at, the object browser. Let's start the exercise with an empty Excel document. So I'm just opening up the VBA editor. Yeah, that's it, Alt F11. I'm just going to create a new module and I start creating a sub. I'm just going to call it test, sub test. First thing I want to show is how you can access a cell within the Excel document. It's quite simple, because there is a function which is called cells. And as you can see, it expects two parameters or two arguments. One is the row index and the other one is the column index. Normally these indexes starts from 0, but because we are in Visual Basic, it actually starts from 1. So cells 1, 1 is going to be the cell in the first row and in the first column. So in typical Excel document is going to be cell A1. And I'm also going to go ahead and tell you that you can get the value in that cell by using the value property. And I'm going to put this value into a message box. So if I just type hello here, if I go back to my document, and if I run this sub, we will get a message hello, because in cell 1.1, 1, the value is hello. Just to show you that this is actually what we have in the cell. And before we go ahead, let's just put a breakpoint here and then see how this all looks like in the debugger. So if I just select cells 1, 1, and if I put it to the watch, then what we can see, it's so this one is a range type. And if you remember, we used ranges before when we selected a part of the Excel document. So you can treat it as a special type of range because it only contains one single cell, but we can have, of course, multiple cells, not with this method, not with this function, but with another function that we used previously. And if I open up this object, I can see all the different properties of this object. And I believe this is something that we have seen as well in the past. So we can see properties like the column width, and then we can see all the different formulas if this cell would have a formula. And also we can go even more down and then we can see some stuff. For example, it has a value 2, which contains a string in this case. So what if we explore this a little bit further? So let's say here I'm going to put 12, and here I'm going to put, let's say, the square root of 30. If I go back to my Visual Basic editor, and if I just run again, let me just change. So the row index 2, so that is going to give me 12. So as we can see, here our formula and everything is the same, because that doesn't actually have a formula. And now we can see that the value 2 is a double type, so it actually knows that it's, you know, no longer a up until now we talked about like integers, and I might have also mentioned float, but then we also have a double type, which is like a double precision value. So that is quite a generic type in Visual Basic, because it can store really high numbers. And if I go to the next one, so cell 3,1, then now we can see that the formula is different, because it actually has a formula. But again, if we look at the value 2 field, the value 2 field is now again a double, because it's a number with various decimal places. And actually we can see that that's the actual precision the Visual Basic uses. But in this cell now we are only seeing 6 decimal places, because that's how much it fits into this cell. And now if I take this code just one step further, then actually now we can enhance our calculation program by taking the values from the actual cells in the Excel document, instead of using local variables or actual variables. So what I can do now is I can do message box cells 2,1, which is the A2, plus cells 3,1 dot value. So add the two numbers together and then display the value in a message box. So if I do that, then hopefully we should get the sum. So 12 plus 5.47226 is 17.44722. Well, and actually we see more decimal places here. So this is the simplest way of accessing the contents within the Excel document. And it's not only about accessing the actual values or the content of the cells, but we can use the same command to also write them. So if I do cells 4,1 dot value equals the sum of these two, then when I run this, actually I will set the value of A4, which is going to be the sum of these two fields together. Obviously I'm not using any formulas now, so you don't see a formula of A2 plus A3, because all this logic is now happening within Visual Basic. So you can use the dot value property to read and also to write to that cell. What I want to show you now is the object browser, and that's something that I mentioned in the first lesson, but actually I didn't have time to look at it because the lesson was just really long anyway. And the object and I'm going to use this object browser to look at a particular object, because all we can see here in the watch window is what are the different properties, but we don't really see its methods and its events. And I don't think the events are particularly interesting at the moment, but methods can be quite interesting, because that's what we can see what the object can do, like, you know, what we can do with a cell. We can, you know, clear its content, we can select it, we can do all sorts of things with it. And for that we need the object browser. So for this exercise I'm going to put a breakpoint again, and I'm going to run the program because I want to see the watch window as well. And now I can see that the cells method, or so the cells function, is returning a range type. So let's go into the object browser. So you can do that by clicking on F2, or you can come to this icon which looks like a box with different colors and shape objects above it. And now here you can see all the different objects that are now available in Excel and in the libraries that are linked to Excel. And I can just, if you type the first letter, then this list jumps to the first matching class in that. And so now we can see that we have a range class here. There is also a ranges class, which is like more ranges together. But okay, let's just focus on the range first. And what we can see here is that here we see stuff. I mean, what we see in the window, in the watch window, we can see it here. So you see add item, allow edit, applications, areas. As I told you, you only see certain things here in the watch window, but when you look at the actual object in the object browser, you can see a lot more, and that can be useful in a few cases. And just by looking at the icons, you can see that the properties have one set of icons. So that's the, I don't know, this page and the finger on the top left, top right. And when you click on it, then you can also see that, okay, this property is a variant, and let's just pick something which we have all seen. Well, we have seen the value too, and again, it has a type of variant, and the reason this has this variant type because, well, as the name suggests, this type can vary. So we have seen this, that if I point the cell to this first cell, then the value 2 is a string. In other cases, it's a double, because the value within that cell, it can be a different type. So in Visual Basic definition, variant can be, well, any other type basically. But if I look at text, oh, so text is variant as well. Top is variant as well. And if I scroll to the top, then you can see that it also has methods, and these are these blue icons, like bluish, some kind of color. And again, you can see that, okay, so this is a function which doesn't have any arguments, and then it also has an address which has a couple of arguments, and it returns a string. And you know, advanced filter, okay, that's some sort of filtering, and you know, autocomplete and auto fit. Well, the auto fit can be a simple one, so that's the same thing when you double click on the at the end of the column, so it resizes the column to fit all the text in that column. So we can I mean, whenever you know that you want to do something with an, let's say, well, in this case it's a cell, you know that the cell must have a function to do something, because you can access that like in the Excel as well. Then you come to the object browser, and then basically you start looking through the through it, and then, you know, hopefully you can pretty much figure it out. For example, an easy one, clear. So that's a simple one. So it's a function. It doesn't accept any arguments, closing brackets, opening brackets. Well, there is no documentation here, but you could probably guess what it does. So it just clears the value of that cell. So if I click on window and I will go back to my module 1, and let's say I'm just going to comment this line out. Oh, sorry, again, bad habits. So if I do like cells and clear, I don't have to put the brackets here in Visual Basic. So if I run this, yeah, 17.477 now disappears because we just cleared it. I don't want to go through all the different methods of this range class, because, well, in most cases you're probably not going to use many of these. But I just want to point out something. So you can see there is one which is called the offset. And the offset also expects a row offset and a column offset, and it returns a range. So it returns the same type what we are looking at. And what this offset is quite useful for is that you can access the cells relative to another cell. So let me give you an example. So let's say we have, you know, table 1, and then somewhere else we have table 2. And we have values like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and this one is 6, 7, 8, 9, 8, 7, let's say. Okay. If I want the top left cell of this, I can easily use like cells. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, and sorry, that's the column count. So that's 4. And the row is 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, that's again 4. So if I do message box 4 dot value, then I get 1. So that's how we access the cell. So now we got the value of this cell, which is D4. So what if I want to get, E5? So I can put here like 5, 5, because that would be the row index and the column index of that cell. But I can also use the offset. So if I say that from these cell, which is the D4, I want to go one down and one right. So that's offset 1, 1. If I execute, that will give me 5. If I do 1, 2, so that would be 1 down and 2 left, sorry, 2 right, that would be F5, which is 6. Sorry. Well, you need to be in the method that you want to run and then plus run. So it gives me 6, so it's all fine. So now if I want to go over to table 2, I want to reference that. And again, if I want the cell in the second row and the third column of that table, of course I can go to, like, H16, which is going to be 16, so cells 16, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. But what I can also do is still use the offset. So in the first cell, I'm just going to address the top left cell of this, let's say, table, small table. So that would be row 15. And the column, actually you can do the column like this, is you select, you see on the up here where it says A15, if you look at that, now it's select, it says you have selected 1 row and 6 columns. So I know that that's column 6. That's easier than counting. So if I execute this now, it should give me 7. And it gives me 7. So that's how you can relatively address cells within Excel. Again, it can be useful, quite useful in many different cases where you have, same structure of data in multiple places of your document, let's say within one single worksheet. Okay, that's cool. Let's move on. And let's just show you something. So we have seen this before. So cells 1, 1, not value. If I do this, I get this, hello, this is my context. And when you execute these cells, that starts looking at the worksheet that you are on at the moment. So if I create another worksheet, and if I go back to my Visual Basic, and if I run the program now, we are going to get this, because in here the only thing we have defined is we want cells 1, 1, which is A1, but it can be A1, well, there is A1 in every single worksheet on your document, so obviously it gets the one that is active at the moment, so the ones that you have selected and the one which is visible on the screen. But it doesn't have to be like that, because in some cases you also want to be in one particular worksheet, but you also want to access data from another worksheet. And you can do the same thing in when you are using data. You probably remember this one quite well enough. If you just use the equal sign and you start referencing a different sheet, then you get the sheet of the name, exclamation mark, and the field, the cell ID, or the cell ID. So that's how you reference data from another worksheet. And the same pretty much exists in Visual Basic as well. And the way to do it is do it like this. So instead of just saying cells 1, 1 dot value, now we are going to specify in which sheet. And the way to do it is you do this, sheets, and in brackets and in double quotations, you specify the name of the sheet that you want to look up. So if I run this program now, let me delete this one just to make sure it's not reading that. So if you do this now, then, this is a different worksheet. So we are actually getting the data from this cell on the other worksheet. And of course, if you are in this worksheet, if I run this program, the result is going to be exactly the same, because your program is now, your code is no longer limited on which is the active sheet, because you are definitely specifying the sheets, well, the sheet 2. And let's just look at this piece of code again. So you can see that here we can clearly see how objects in Visual Basic and also in other programming languages can depend on each other and how these objects can be nested. And we can actually see this relationship in the object browser. So if you look at this class, which is called the sheets, and so I already selected that. As you can see, it has, I mean, you're probably going to see this a lot, that if you have a class which has these methods of add and select and item and then delete, that usually is an object which is some sort of collection. So it has like multiple items, which, you know, pretty much how you would expect it, like this sheet objects to work, because it has to contain multiple sheets. And as you can see, for example, it has a count. So that is going to tell us how many sheets the document has. So if I go back to my code, and if I just modify it, let's say message box sheets dot count. Oh, we can already see its properties. So it's dot count, and if I run this, oh, we have 2. So we have 2 sheets, sheet 1 and 2. And what we can also do is we can message box sheets, and what we see here is that we have an item and it expects an index, and that returns you know, one of the sheets. And if I for that object, I can also say that, okay, I want cells 1 1 and dot value. So as I said, in whenever we have these like collections, or also in programming, it's called an array, because it has, you know, multiple objects. So it has sheet 1 and a sheet 2, and then probably, you know, it can be like hundreds more. So the first one is always called 1. And if I run this now, okay, we have 2 sheets, and then hello, this is my content. And then, okay, this is the different worksheets. So this one, which was the second message box, actually picked up the value from the first sheet. Well, let's just follow the program. Okay, okay, we are interested in the sheets. Of the sheets, we need the item 1, so that's the first sheet, so that's sheet 1, and for that we can also do the cells of 1 1 dot value. So there are basically 2 different ways how you can access a sheet of the document. You can do it like sheets.item, and then you can put the item in, so the first one being 1, the second one being 2, and then go and so on. Or you can call it by the name of the sheet, or the caption. What is it? Change. Well, it doesn't say. So basically the name of the sheet. And well, it really depends on you. So if you want to fix the sheet names, then that's how you do it. Or if your document can be any number of sheets, but you always know that you have to go to each of them and to get the value of, I don't know, 8, 10, you can just do like, you know, items, item 1, item 2, item 3, and then go on. And of course, you have a count, so the system is going to tell you how many sheets this document actually has. But again, later on we will learn how you can do it in a nice way, in a loop, and then read the values or go through the sheets one by one. So now we learned that in Excel you can use the sheet objects to access the different worksheets on the document, and that's how you can control how your code is reading information from Excel. And by the way, since we are here, I think I also have to mention there is also another one. If I go back to the object browser, because it makes more sense. So for example, if I click on the sheet, now you can see that this is a class sheets, and it's a member of Excel. So you can think of it as this sheet object is part of like a bigger object or a bigger library. Let's just not go into details of the difference between the two, which is the Excel. But if I click on that, I get this navigation which takes me directly to this object or this library Excel. And now we can see that, oh, this also has some really interesting stuff. For example, active sheet or active cell. So if you want, if you need a code where it needs to perform the same function on multiple sheets, and for some reason you need that sheet object, you need to know like what is its current index, you can use the active sheet. And let's have a look at how this active sheet works. I'm not going to write a code for it, or write a line of code for it, but I'm just going to start a debugger, and I'm actually going to go into the debugger. I'm going to override these cells. I'm going to just change it to active sheet, and as you can see, so it returns an object, and if I open it up, well, actually we can see that, well, that's basically sheet 1. So it has a field which is called the code name. It probably has some other stuff as well. So it has an index of 1 because that's the first sheet. And what else? Yeah, whether it's visible, you can probably have a property which shows, I don't know, the colors, because you can color these sheets to have different color tabs in here. I'm not sure if I can find it one. Okay, so it has a name which is called a sheet 1. And yeah, but if I let this go, if I switch back to sheet 2, and if I run again and I look at the debugger, now we can see that this is, now we are on sheet 2. So again, you can build a code which looks at which sheet which is the active sheet at the moment, and maybe, you know, base the code based on, you know, what the active sheet is. You can, you know, it performs one function if it's on one sheet, and it performs a different function if it's on a different sheet. Now we have seen this sheet and the cells object, and the next one I want to show is actually it's called the application. Application. It's this one, which is again, unless you know that this object exists, you wouldn't. It's quite hard to find, and this has also a lot of very interesting functions that you might want to use. But again, I'm just mentioning to you this because maybe you have to have it in your back of your mind, some of the important objects within Microsoft Excel that you are most likely going to be using in a daily basis. Just, you know, have it in the back of my mind. You don't really have to know what this object do, or what how you can use the object, because you can always come to the object browser. You can quickly flick through the methods and the functions, and then figure it out if you can use that for whatever you need it for. So for example, one thing about the application that I personally use quite a lot is, you know, when you go into the formulas, you have these calculation options. So you can have an Excel document to run the calculations automatically or manually, and that is actually quite useful, because if you have a really big Excel, you make one single change that could trigger a lot of calculation and reference fields, and everything needs to update. So if you in some cases you might need to set it to manual, because you know that you will be changing a lot of different stuff in an Excel document which has an impact on these cells. You know, each would have an impact and do a lot of recalculation. So what you would do is you will switch back to manual calculation, you make all the changes on your document, and at the end you either switch back to automatic, or you just do, you know, calculate now. And that's exactly that's something that you can do in Visual Basic as well. So if I go back to the code, so we can see that it has methods like a calculate, which runs the calculation. There is also a calculate full. We probably would have to go into the document to see what's the difference between the two. And it also has a calculation method, or a calculation option here, where you can say whether that should be automatic or manual. So if I go back to my Visual Basic code, I was there already, and I can just do like application calculation equals, and as you can see, that's where you can set whether the calculation should be automatic or manual. So for example, you have a complicated code, well, not right now, but hopefully somewhat later, you have a complicated code which does a lot of update. So in the beginning of the code, you issue this application.calculation equals Excel calculation manual. So that would disable all the automatic updates, do all your fancy logic here. And then at the end, once you are done with everything, then you do calculation equals back to automatic. So then, and then maybe what you can also do is application.calculate. So it turns back to automatic mode, and then it forces Excel to do the calculation. If in case you don't know what this is, so for example, if I do it a manual calculation, and if I say that this cell needs to be this plus that, and if I do 2 to 4, because we don't have calculation, the changes of these fields do not trigger the calculation of that, which has the formula. So if I click, obviously it calculates, but again, if I change that, that wouldn't update because I'm on the manual mode. So that's just useful feature to know, especially if you are dealing with large Excel documents. So now you have 3 objects to remember: sheets, cells, and application. And now let's learn yet another more, which we have seen in the past, and that's going to be the range one. So we have seen how this works. So we can specify the range, and we specify it by, let's say, C5. By the top left and the bottom right cell, separated by colons, and then specifying as a string in double quotes. And that is going to give us a range. And then the range has exactly the same properties as a cell. But of course, if you want to read specific values from an Excel table, you wouldn't use range, because range contains a set of fields, not a single one. So some of these functions, like the value, doesn't make sense, because, well, what value are you interested in if you have selected like 9 different cells? But again, there are some functions where you want to copy, you want to delete the content, then you use the range. And also, you can also use range as to select columns or rows. And that's it works exactly the same way how you see in Excel. So for example, if you select a row, so if I select a row, then a row is like A colon A, and if you select the entire row, that's like 8 colon 8. Again, these are not functions that you would use to read a particular value, but if you want to like delete stuff, or move cells, move rows around, insert a lot of lines using the program, then you need to make these kind of selections. So for example, let me just put some values in here. So if I want to delete this section of the Excel document, so we can see that it's, let me just cheat. Okay, so A11 to C13. A11 to C13, and then range, and then, well, we know that it has one which is called clear. Well, actually, let's check this out, clear comments. So if I put a comment here, review, no, what is that? Is that on insert? No, it must be on review. Yeah, it's here. This is my comment. So we have a comment here. Well, we don't want to get rid of it because you want to clean up this document. Then we have done this clear comment. Let's execute. Well, you get the message boxes, and your comment is gone. So again, for mass operations on multiple cells, you use the range value. So now you have one more object to remember. It's sheets, cells, application, and range. And if you forget how you need to use them, again, go to the object browser, look for the range, check, because you may be You might remember that, oh, there is this method which is really useful. Is it called calculation or something? Okay, where can I find it? Oh, it's not, well, there is calculate here, but okay, there was another one. Maybe it was in application. So you click on application and it's like, oh, what's the calculate here? Is the calculate calculation. Oh yeah, that's it. So that's how you usually find stuff in the help and in the object browser. But of course you have Google for all this as well. Because I was constantly overwriting the code during the exercise, I put this very simple document together. So that's going to be the lesson 3 Excel document, which basically shows everything that we have done: how to read a cell, how to write a cell by reading 2 other cells, adding the values together, how you can use the offset to address cells relative to another cell. So again, the example was how you can read like the middle, well, in this case, the middle cell in this 3x3 grid. And then we have gone over how to use the sheets object to read data from other worksheets, how you can address them using the name and the ID. So these 2 buttons demonstrate that. How to use the range object to execute something on a range of cells. So in this case, if I have this range of 9 cells, how I can get rid of the comments in that cell. So that's just one of the methods of the range object that we used. And the example that we used from the application object is how to turn the automatic calculation on and off, which could be useful if you are updating a large Excel document or doing a large calculation and you don't want the Excel to unnecessarily update the table. If you go into the document, the Visual Basic code, you see that for each button there is a separate function created. So the names of the functions are quite self-explanatory. So you find the example code that you should remember. So these are the basic ways you are using these methods, using these objects. And of course, I just put a little bit of comment in case you don't remember what these examples are used for. Actually, there is one more thing about the range that I definitely want to mention, and it is related to these, how we address these cells, and actually this is something that I didn't know about for a very, very long time. But normally when you have a cell, for example, here you have B4, then you would reference to this cell as B4 in the range, or, well, as we just said, that it's row count or row ID 4, column ID 2. But you can create your own specific names for certain fields. So if you want to store quantity and you don't want to remember exactly which cell that quantity field is stored, or maybe your Excel file can vary, and sometimes it's in B4, sometimes it's F8, depending on how many lines you have above, or how your table is, or your Excel document is formatted, then you can actually rename the cell. So you select the cell, you come here to B4, and then you overwrite it. And now this cell can be referenced as B4, just like before, but now we can reference it as quantity by its name. And actually, once you created these names, you can come here to, I think it's formulas, and then name manager. So you can see that you have a quantity name, and it refers to sheet 1 B4. And of course, if you start inserting cells above, so let's say rows above, then my quantity is now B6. So it works the same way as like normal cells, that if they get shifted left and right, or down or right, or even up or left, then obviously these references would get updated. So that's fine. You can use these name fields. And how do you address them in Visual Basic? So that's actually quite simple as well. And for that we use the range object. And normally in the range you would specify the top left and the bottom right cell. But now you can use the names as well here. So I can just type quantity and dot value. I mentioned before that using the range.value wouldn't make a lot of sense if you are selecting multiple cells like a part of the table or a part of the Excel document, because just what's the value of 9 cells? But here in this particular case, the range, this name, the name quantity refers to one single cell, so that definitely has a value. So let me put a value, let's say 34 here. And if I go back to my Excel document and if I put this into message box, okay, and then if I run this one, then we get 34. So it definitely references to that single cell and we can get its value. So again, you can probably see from this particular example is that it's much easier to name the specific cells where you have certain values rather than referencing to them by cell counts or like B4 or, well, it's B6 at the moment. And that, of course, this is a very nice way of referencing to cells not by exact cells or row IDs and column IDs, but rather than its name. And of course this cell can move around, but then so as its name, so you can always going to be pointing to the same cell or the same value in the Excel document. So that's actually a quite nice feature, so just remember that. In summary, what we have learned today is how we can access the various cells of the Excel document, how we can read the content of an Excel document, how we can change the value in an Excel document. Also, how we can address the different worksheets. So if we want to read data from various worksheets, we can obviously do that. We can select worksheets by name or by ID. We also looked at the application object where we can control some basic Excel operations or functions that are applicable for the entire Excel document. And finally, we had time to look at the object browser and just to understand how it can help us in our everyday activities, just to find things that Excel can do, just explore objects a little bit better and understand how each of the methods work and what sort of arguments they expect. The exercise for today is going to be a fairly simple one, maybe not so simple to implement, but the actual code you would need to write could be just a couple of lines of. The scenario I've taken is again like a hypothetical scenario is a weight calculator. So let's say there is a product where the product has different options and also it has different packaging, and the weight of the product depends on which option you select and which, let's say, package variant. And we would need to build a weight calculator which in a worksheet you specify what is your option, what is your package variant, and then it should look up the corresponding weight in the weight table, and also provided with a quantity, it should time that weight by the quantity to give us the complete or the weight of that package option quantity combination. And to make it even more complicated, I have created two tables. Let's say this is available in two different materials. Obviously, in plastic, the values are going to be different than as in aluminium. And what I would like you to do is to use pretty much the range, the cells, and the sheets objects that we have used or learned today, and use them in this exercise. I have already created the exercise document, and when you go into the video description, you will find a link to the lesson 3 Excel document and also this exercise 3 document. So just download that. It doesn't contain any code. It just shows basically the format that I come up with. So you have a calculation worksheet where you can specify this option, which is a number from 1 to 5, and also a package variant, which is again a number from 1 to 5, and then you have a quantity. So what you can do here is you can put a button here. So you specify these values. So you select the option, you select the package variant, and select the quantity, and then by pressing the button, your code should calculate the weight in plastic and the weight of aluminum. So that would be the two different materials, and the data for that is on the data worksheet. So you find that by option or by package variant, what is the weight. So that's what you have to find out, and do it for plastic and do it for aluminum, times it by the quantity to come up with a final figure. I do understand that this is something that you can do with standard basic, Excel functions like the VLOOKUP, but the purpose of this exercise is to do it in Visual Basic. Again, by the end of it, you probably can see that again, this can be done in one single line. But as you see here, we are using two tables. So you can have a piece of code where you get the value or the weight by option and package, and because these are the same format, you can use the offset here. And again, since you have multiple sheets, you also have to use the sheet object. And for the range object, the idea behind that is that you can rename these cells, the option, the package variant, and the quantity, instead of using like C4, C5, and C3, C4, and C5. You can give them a name, so then you can access its value using the range object. And again, you can also rename these one and then use the range object instead of using the cell object to set its value. So, but that's really up to you. And of course, because calculating the weight in plastic and in aluminum going to be exactly the same code, so you can put that into a different function, and the input to that function is obviously going to be the option and the package, and let's say the starting cell, for example this one, from which you can offset to get the weight from this table. And so the calculation is going to be exactly the same. The only difference between plastic and aluminum is that the cell you offset from is going to be different, and that you can achieve in a function. I hope hopefully that was clear enough. Maybe I've given too much hint what is the best way of doing that, but yeah, give it a try. Thank you for staying with me till the end. If you think this content was good enough that you would pay for it, I have a good news for you. Click on the Patreon link above and follow the instructions. Otherwise, subscribe and like, because as you know, that really helps. Thanks for watching, and hopefully see you in the next video.